Good morning. I'm so happy to be here. I don't know if you understand how famous the Village Zendo is, but it is. My history, I think 2004, I was in New York City and Village Zendo loaned us some zafus for a public sitting. And Seicho Judy Fleischman was helpful. Just like this trip, I should have listened more to the native New Yorkers. But that's all, everything happens as it happens. So I'm happy to be here. And doing the chant reminds me again what the point of this talk is. I've been on a book tour and giving talks, but the book was the purpose of the book was an excuse, apparently, for giving talks about the book, because I'm a little introverted, and I was having difficulty putting forth the thing I wanted to say. So, let's see. You know, I always make notes and I never follow them. So anyway, I will just jump to the book title, and it's Open Reality, Meeting the Polycrisis Together with All Beings. Now, I have been focused on climate change since, I think it was 2004 or 5, when I started training at Soto Zen community in Bloomington, Indiana, and I heard Richard Heinberg speak, and I had only had this vague notion that there was maybe something to worry about the climate, and that shiftly switched to, we are in deep trouble. And I thought that working on helping the survival of humans and other beings was a beneficial thing to do. I've always been focused on the first vow. That's actually what brought me to Zen. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. So that's kind of guided my path since then. So I thought this was going to be a book about climate change, and I started writing in 2019. And then COVID arrived, and lots of people died. You were in New York. It was not nearly that bad in Minnesota. And then George Floyd was murdered in full view with the police officers preventing people from helping the victim a few blocks from where I used to live for, I don't know, 8 or 10 years. And the whole world blew up. I mean, literally, there were protests around the world. And I sort of got pulled into that, but I wasn't living there. I was an hour away. But suddenly, there was a lot to think about besides climate change. So we have this expression, meeting the polycrisis together with all beings. Polycrisis means a lot of things are going badly all at once, and they're making each other worse. We'll put it that way. And by the way, I finished the book before last November's election. And it's probably just as well. It would have been depressing. And I had no intention to write a depressing book. So we have the title Open Reality. And my position, which is certainly a Buddhist position, is that the future is not fixed. The future is created moment by moment. Our particular lives are created moment by moment, and we create the world around us moment by moment. And that puts Buddhists, maybe I should only speak for Zen Buddhists, that puts us in a different relationship with what's happening around us. We are not individually responsible, but collectively we create everything. And that's both what we call good and what we call bad. So meeting with all beings, this might be familiar. You notice you have different translations on things, so it might not be familiar, but a serious, young, serious Zen person spent a few weeks at my farm, and we did things like weeding. And he created a gata together with all beings, and then it depended. Together with all beings, may we open the path for new life. So we were planting gardens, or we were making a path, or we were pruning. Pulling up buckthorn was the most challenging. Buckthorn was imported to Minnesota for the purpose of making hedges. Buckthorn liked Minnesota and other places a lot, and it puts a chemical in the soil that interferes with most other things thriving. So the emotions in Minnesotans about buckthorn can run pretty strongly. And I think I created that one, together with all beings, may you return to your true home. And saying the gata, as any gata, just helps me remember, helps me be grounded in my place in the real world. Certainly, as a civilized human, I have no right to tell somebody else they're an invasive species. Okay, so the book is an outline I read insanely, voraciously, and delightedly for several years. And then I made myself stop so I could actually produce something. So we have my sense of things, engaging with history, analysis. I was reading anthropology and archaeology and so forth. I just received so much information. And I wrote the book not so much for Buddhists, but from Buddhism towards people, especially activists, but people who were interested, especially environmental activists, but especially for people who wanted to make a difference in the world, who might be feeling discouraged. So, okay. So now I will read a few things from the book, but not a lot. But here's one. Does anybody know who Ivan Illich was? Okay, a few. He was one of my heroes, and I actually once met him in person. He worked in Latin America and wrote brilliantly. So here's one of his things. Neither revolution nor reformation can ultimately change a society. Rather, you must tell a new, powerful tale, one so persuasive that it sweeps away the old myths and becomes the preferred story, one so inclusive that it gathers all the bits of our past and our present into a coherent whole, one that even shines some light into the future so that we can take the next step. If you want to change a society, then you have to tell an alternative story. So, as I was looking in him, I found that he said the thing that I needed to put in here, which is to say, why am I not getting arrested? Why am I not putting my body in the way of the pipeline? I used to say I'm waiting till it comes home, but then it came home to northern Minnesota. It was line 3. I went out to Standing Rock. it was cold, and I don't think I was very useful, but I received so much going to the prayers at the river every morning. Amazing cultural event. And I believe that event changed the story of resistance to fossil fuels and environmental damage. And the reason I say that is, like, we lost the battle, they built the pipeline. Just as we lost in northern Minnesota, they built the pipeline. It's already leaking all over the place. But something changed that in 2016, it was a relatively new thing to follow Indigenous leadership. And I think that 2016 was where that change happened. I had certainly encountered the power of that leadership before in other places. But now, in places that I know, where people want to protect the environment in particular, they take leadership from the people who have lived here for hundreds and thousands of years without hurting it. You'd think that would be obvious. And the similarity between Zen teachings and lots of indigenous wisdom is really close. So I have quotations and stories. I also have stories from Buddhism in Cambodia and how you behave when you enter a place. But I'm going to do what I meant to do, and I can find those things because we will have questions and discussion. If I run over, somebody tell me, or if I get, anyway. So what we have here, so first I started with imagery. I'm trying to attract people. I'm selling something, which is really embarrassing, but there you go. I remember somebody said to me that Katagiri Roshi was constantly selling. He was selling waking up. So I'm selling, I'm looking for a cultural waking up. What if we could live in a culture that automatically respected the other beings around us and that felt twice? I've lived sometimes with people who it's like, it was really hard to step on an ant or to swat a mosquito. And many of us did it anyway, but you know, what if that weren't ridiculous? What if that were normal? So I started with some imagery, and then in part 2, I started retelling the story of humanity. And I will say that a lot of people are working on changing that story. And I have not read them all, but the ones that I read that I thought were great are in the bibliography. Because I realized I can't get 5 PhDs at this point in my life, but I can point and I can summarize and I can try to make something that's easy to read. So what I will say is ancient humans and humans that are like distant from what we call civilization, they're really different. And often they look at our way of life and try to protect themselves from it because their way of life is kinder and gentler. So what? And then I asked, well, how did we get this way? Now, there's a book called Ishmael by Daniel Quinn, which doesn't document it all. It pretends to be a novel. And it talks about how this society became the way it is. And why, when people saw that we were headed for trouble, more violence all the time, more destruction, more illnesses, why they weren't able to go back. So other cultures have walked away from cities and violence and so forth. So, and then I asked the question, well, so what can we do about it? That was the hardest part to write. I have just one story about other societies or past societies. In Ukraine, there's something that's called a megasite. Now, the reason archaeologists call it a megasite is because apparently, I mean, the writers that I'm reading suggest that they couldn't acknowledge something as a city unless it had kings, military, and inequality. In this megasite, has lots and lots of houses, roughly the same size and quality. It has great open spaces for community gatherings, and there's no evidence of war. So I'd like to live in that kind of city. Anyway, Graeber and Wengrow are the names, but it's like I just jumped into that book because there was so much good stuff. And then, so the other thing that I did was I didn't repeat what other people were doing. I referred to it, so there's very little here. There are no statistics. Well, that's probably not true. But basically, it's not about counting the awful stuff that's happening. You can get that anywhere. But it is about how do we respond? What do we do with this situation? And it turned out, just like it turned out the last time I wrote a book, that the solution all comes from stuff that I learned in Zen practice. So I talked about knowing your values. I talked about becoming willing to change. Okay, a piece of my personal story, I heard that talk by Richard Heinberg. I had come to Bloomington to train, to be ordained, which I was not long after, and transmitted and be able to wear this robe and to teach. And what I was going to teach, it's like we're finding out as we go. I think that's what happens, is you find out as you go. Because of being allergic to incense, I had to start my own place. This is like not actually my preference. I could have lived happily at Tassajara for a long time. Okay, so the new story that I offer is the old story. And I'm going to read a few pieces. Chapter 19 is titled Lived by All Beings. And you will recognize this. Everything lives us. Everything breathes us into life. Everything witnesses us into being. And we, in turn, live, breathe, and witness them into existence. In Buddhism, this is called interdependent co-arising. Things arise and things fall, dependent on each other, linked together irrevocably. We are neither separate nor permanent, but completely embedded in the web of life, with a spark of awareness in this individual being as in other individual beings. We look out at each other and recognize each other. Our mutual seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, sensing is how we create each other. This is not limited to humans. There's an image in physics of matter as concentrated energy, or a disruption in the space-time continuum. I have a bachelor's degree in physics, and that was what I was obsessed with. It's not flat, it curves. Space is like hills and valleys. It's sculpted by the substances we call matter. My own image of matter is as concentrated consciousness. I think of both matter and energy as just shapes and movement in the mind field. Space is alive. There's enormous energy in a cubic inch of intergalactic space. Everything around us is alive and conscious. Plants, fungi, mycelia, cells, bacteria, rocks, minerals, waters, atoms, molecules, quarks, the billions of tiny creatures that make up half our own body weight. I name them to invoke them, to invite them here as witnesses and co-creators. We are created by everything. Now, I said some things that I understand are controversial in Buddhist circles. Some people don't think rocks are conscious. I don't understand them. So let me see. That's not where I want to go. Oh, okay. I want to go here. We live in a society deeply based on Buddhism's three poisons: greed, anger, and self-delusion, with the core poison being the illusion of separation. It's combined with an idea that other things are lifeless or unimportant and available for our use. There's a story in David Abram's first book, The Spell of the Sensuous, in which he studies with shamans in Indonesia. The local people put out offerings for the little people. Curious, he goes to watch what happens with the offerings. He sees hundreds of ants lining up and walking to the bowl of rice and carrying off the rice one grain at a time until the bowl is empty. He tells his hosts, and they look at him oddly. Finally, he understands that he had not understood. They knew that little people meant ants. They did not think little people were some kind of magical creatures or had no bodies or anything but the visible little beings seen all the time. Of course, this is my interpretation, so be careful. If ants deserve offerings, then ants are magical beings in themselves, as are we, incidentally, and all the larger animals. And yes, plants, rocks, rivers, mountains. We really already know that mountains are conscious. Dogen wrote about them. Okay. And then we have something really controversial. I titled this chapter, Changing the Structure of Reality. And then I said, meditation and ritual change the structure of reality. So later on, I explained that meditation means zazen and what that's about. But I quoted Dogen as saying, all beings are Buddha nature, when everybody thought, well, the best thought was all beings have Buddha nature. No, we are Buddha nature. Consciousness is who we are and what we are. Everything is mind. Not everything is imagination, but everything is consciousness. And whatever that means. I wrote a little more about that, but I want to move on to about changing the structure of the universe. And so I can say, why did I say that? Because, you know, zazen is good for nothing. Somebody recently says, yes, but what kind of nothing is it good for? So I'm still thinking about that. Or what's the nothing that it's good for? And it's like, oh, I haven't processed it yet. But here's what I did figure out. There are rules that say only the mundane exists and there is no sacred. Those are human rules, and meditation changes them. The rules that say you are alone, the rules that say you are supreme. It changes both of those, the miserable and the arrogant versions of isolation. Meditation removes those rules. It creates an opening in which everything is open and flexible. Things are allowed to be as they are. Things create each other. It's possible to receive the creation of all the other beings of the universe, not just the devas, but the rocks and waters too. It's possible to send out creation into them, to recognize the flow of mutual creation called interdependence. And I am going to jump to the thing that is kind of the end so that we can talk, so we can talk together. And so this is about that feeling of that we're separate. And I wrote, ask for help. A tragedy of this age is how we've thought ourselves alone. As individuals, families, towns, workplaces, states, nations, or the human species, we've imagined ourselves separate and independent. Thus, we've been unable to imagine help from spirits or gods or God. We've not asked help from forests, even while our scientists describe the many ways forests help all of those within them. Relying only on ourselves, we've damaged the others who might have helped us, who have been helping us all along. The deep wilderness is the vital heart and soul of the whole earth, the entire biosystem. Rather than logging and mining, we could return to worshiping, listening, receiving, meditating there, making offerings, ceremonies, humility, prayer, gratitude, and faith. We're surrounded by the fruits of a deluded way of life. And my proposal is that we can change that we can change, we can leave our participation in the delusion. And Zen has it, you know. Zen has the answer. And I put it in plain English, hoping to be more available. And I might have said some things that don't seem like Zen. And I'm tired of my own voice, so please ask a question or make a comment, either way.